Yes, Simon Wells, my guest, author of the Manson biography, Coming Down Fast. The next night, he
Hmm.
takes some of those people out again and others,
Hmm.
seemingly drives around at random before landing on the doorstep of the LaBianca house, Rosemary and Lino LaBianca. What happened that night?
It's interesting. The second night, um, Manson had said, and again, this gives credibility to the fact that he did go back to Cielo Drive. He said it was too messy last night, what happened. So my thoughts are that he had gone back, and he was going to show them what to do properly. Um, he took with him Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, Linda Kasabian as driver again, and Leslie Van Houten, and a guy called Steve Grogan. They went out ostensibly on a random killing spree. It's interesting to note that at every point that Manson said we're going to stop and kill something, he balked on the idea, and they ended up in Waverley Drive near Griffith Park. Um, so the prosecutor will say it was a random killing. I have my suspicions about this because Manson and members of the family had actually been to the property next door to the LaBianca's house on numerous occasions in 1968, maybe 1969. Um, Interestingly, that house was owned by a guy called Harold True, and who was a contact of Phil Kaufman, who was an old contact of Charles Manson's, and he'd promised some advance in their Manson's musical career, which never happened. Interestingly, I discovered a letter written by Lino LaBianca to a relative, which said that he'd broken up several parties at the next door house, and on one occasion had an altercation with someone, which is interesting, which I didn't know that before. Anyway, they ended up at the LaBianca's house at around midnight on the night of August 9th, and Manson went in with Tex Watson, found Lino and LaBianca in the house, and tied them up. He then came out and he ordered Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten's back into the house with Tex. He cleared off, and then the three of them, and there's no other word for it, butchered the
Mm.
LaBiancas before clearing off themselves
Yeah.
in the most horrendous fashion.
And your
It was.
feeling is that he had met Lino LaBianca prior to that. He was the strange bloke next door that LaBianca had complained about.
I think there's something going on there. There's been an inference that LaBianca had mafia connections, and Manson was ordered to do a hit on behalf of the mafia. I found nothing to suggest that, and although the police actually looked at it at the time, um, nothing has come. And also within in 40 years since this, I would have expected something hard to have come out rather than just idle speculation.
There is a lot of speculation about why these murders were carried out the way they
Hmm.
were and why they were chosen.
Hmm.
They were, in fact, as it turns out, the Tate House was a house that he'd been to many times, and music producer Terry Melcher had lived there, and he was perhaps trying to get some sort of revenge there. If the other house, the LaBianca house, was chosen because, again, it was some sort of revenge thing because someone who had promised him a music career lived next door, that didn't happen. That seems to be the reason why perhaps those houses were chosen. Have you found any other evidence that maybe he was directed to those particular houses? Maybe that someone else was the target?
I wish I had. I mean, as I say, when you're writing a book about a story, it's been so heavily written about. One's looking for new information, and it really came down, as far as I was concerned, to the fact that the Cielo Drive property, although Manson knew that Terry Melcher had moved on, was in itself a sort of metaphor for Hollywood. Melcher had moved down to a beachfront property on, I think it was Pacific Palisades, and as I say, Cielo Drive is an isolated property at the end of a drive, and I think if he knew, I think he'd met Sharon Tate, or rather come across her a while back. But I think he knew that if he was going to enact this horror, he wanted it to be spectacular. He said to them as they left, "Leave a sign, something the world will see." And that's bugged me, that comment, because I think Manson knew that the celebrity nature of the killing would carry his own cause further. I say, obviously, Terry Melcher was the son of Doris Day, but I think he knew that, in a sense, by hitting Hollywood, and the logistics of the Cielo Drive house was perfect for him because it was isolated. It was the end of the drive. The nearby properties were, a fair few meters away. So that's my gut feeling on that. On the La Bianca house, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure why that was chosen, other then the information I had that the house next door, was lived in at one point by Phil Kaufman, who had promised Manson some sort of recording deal. Kaufman actually believes that that house was the target that night, although the house next door to the LaBianca's house was actually empty that night, and it was the first house they went to. They actually looked in that house that first night, so that second night. So maybe if they'd been there that night, that might have been the target. They certainly went next door.
The amazing thing about this is that after those 2 terrible nights of murder, slaughter, butchery, life went on, sort of, not quite the same as before at the Manson family ranch at Spahn Ranch in Los Angeles, but pretty much as before. And it took a long time for the police to finally catch up with them, and that was kind of accidental, and partly because of Susan Atkins making some comments while under arrest for another matter. What happened in the wake of the murders?
The Manson family themselves, they were a cock-a-hoop that the police were so off centre with their investigations. They were arrested en masse on August 17th, and thinking that this was it, that they'd been discovered. In fact, they were arrested on stolen car charges. So again, they felt they were invincible, and they went off to Death Valley, and where Manson was keen to sort of manifest his taking his family to this oneness with the desert environment. And the police were so off. They were mainly centering on the fact that it was a drug hit, and many of the characters who passed through Cielo Drive especially had big drug connections, and that was what they were centering on. Very interestingly, it's a thing I discovered during the researches for this book. In the LaBianca house, on the refrigerator door was written Helter Skelter, and in the blood of one of the victims. That detail was kept out of the public arena, and I'm actually convinced that if police had reported that Helter Skelter had been written on the LaBianca fridge, the Manson family would have been in, because so many people knew about Manson's Helter Skelter theory. That would have pulled them in. They also knew about Manson, but it was on the car theft charges. It wasn't on anything to do with murder.
Amazing that a week after these horrific murders, they've got their man in custody and they don't know.
Yeah. No, they don't know. And as I say, if it had come out into the public arena, I mean, the police knew about it, but it had come into the public arena that Helter Skelter was daubed in blood on a refrigerator, there's many people who come in and out of Spahn's Ranch and the Manson family would have immediately connected that, and someone would have squealed on that. So that is an extraordinary omission.